Thank you.
And am I the host now, Kira?
Yes, now you are.
Okay.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Kira.
Hi, Kira.
Right.
I'll give it 2 more minutes and then we'll start if there are no objections. We still have people coming in. All right, well, I'm not seeing anybody else coming in right now, so why don't we start? And yeah, why don't we start the meeting? So this is a meeting of the Community Board 8 Special Committee on the Hudson River Greenway. My name is Bob Bender. I am the chair of this committee. The other 2 members of this committee who are on the Zoom right now are Laura Spalter, who is also the chair of Bronx Community Board 8, and Dan Paternak, former chair of Bronx Community Board 8 and chair of the Aging Committee. So welcome to everybody. We will begin with approval of the minutes of our last meeting, which was in April of 2021. And Laura and Dan, I hope you had an opportunity to look at those minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Okay, and well, we have a
Seconded.
second also, right?
Yeah.
Any objections? Any abstentions? The minutes are approved. Okay, thank you. It's so easy with 3 people on a committee. All right, so welcome everybody. We will begin by discussing what's happened in the last year with regard to the Greenway. And in that respect, there's, as they say, both bad news and good news. The bad news is that last year we were at the point of where we, the next step in the process was to secure funding for an engineering study for the Greenway, which has been estimated at around maybe $3.5 million. We have still not secured that funding. But in terms of good news, we have done a lot of outreach in the last year and have come to realize that the only way forward is that we have to be part of a larger coalition, because in fact, the point of this Greenway is that it is a connection between Manhattan and Westchester. It is part of a larger network. And there is, as you know, as I have learned over the last year, there is a New York City Greenways Coalition, which is quite extensive, consists of greenways all over the city, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and the Bronx, that I'm aware of, and probably elsewhere. And we are part of a much larger organization, a much larger movement. And we, excuse me, we have in the past year done some outreach to some of these other groups. Specifically, there is a Harlem River Working Group, which is devoted to doing what we're doing along the Harlem River. And they would actually be contiguous to us because they would take the area from Spuyten Duyvil down into the South Bronx. They're not quite as far along as we are in some respects because they don't have the feasibility study, for example, that we have and have had since 2018. But they're very active, and they're also part of the New York City Greenways Coalition. The other, or I shouldn't say another important development in terms of outreach is that in the past year, we've had much more communication with our counterparts in Yonkers, thanks largely to Dr. Morrow, who's on the Zoom tonight, and his colleagues up in Yonkers and Westchester. And we have had some significant communication through Dr. Morrow's efforts with Westchester legislators who represent Southwest Yonkers, where the Greenway would go. Again, as a reminder to everybody, the area that we're talking about and the area that was studied in the feasibility study goes from Spuyten Duyvil Metro North Station all the way up to the Ludlow Station in Yonkers. So it's about 85% in the Bronx, 15 to 20% in Yonkers. But the Yonkers elected officials seem to be, particularly the county officials, seem to be very much on board. And in fact, back on March 15th, Laura, Dan, and I, and Cliff Stanton from the Friends of the Hudson River Greenway were all on a call with Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins, who is the New York State Senate Majority Leader, and who was, as every elected official so far has been, enthusiastic about the Greenway and supportive of the Greenway. And you know, she too said the same thing that we have been running up against repeatedly, which is there seems to be a mechanism in the legislature for providing funds for construction. There doesn't seem to be a mechanism for providing funding for studies, which is the step we're at, the engineering study that we need to do in order to know exactly how to proceed with the construction. So, I mean, at times, it seems to me like we're in a sort of catch-22 here, where in order to get the construction money and in order to do the construction, we need to have an engineering study, but we can't get money for an engineering study. We can get money for construction of the Greenway. So it's a bit of a conundrum, and this is one of the reasons why the progress has been as slow as it has been. And I just want to throw it out there so everybody's aware of that situation. But one thing that has become extremely clear to me over the last year is that the Greenway has got to be more than just the Greenway itself. It has to be more than just a transportation and recreation corridor along the Hudson River. It's very clear from all the communications that I've seen and from everything I've read that the key word right now in all this sort of thing is resiliency. Any construction that you do, particularly on natural features like the Hudson River, there has to be a resiliency component to it. There has to be something that the project does that somehow makes the riverbank or the river itself more resilient, more able to combat climate change, storms, and that sort of thing. And in that regard, I've been referred over the last several months to a very well-known, although it wasn't known to me, very well-known, very respected engineering firm whose specialty is green infrastructure and that sort of thing. They're called Mott MacDonald, and they have been volunteering their time over the last several months. And Cliff and I were on a Zoom with them a few months ago, where they they have actually taken an interest in the Greenway. They're very interested in what we're trying to do. And they have been volunteering some time in advising us on what the next steps in this process might be, ways in which we might incorporate resiliency into what we're doing. A key figure here is somebody whom I've known for some time, and I know Bob Finuzzi on the community board knows him well as well, Paul Mankiewicz, who is over at Lehman College, has his own institute, has been doing green infrastructure in the Bronx for 40 years. And he connected us to Mott McDonald and has been advising us. And, what we're going to try to do with this project to broaden the scope of it is to make it not just another extension of the Greenway like the one in Manhattan that's built on piers out in the river, but one that also incorporates a resiliency element that enhances the wetlands along the Hudson River. Everything from that they've been doing in smaller projects all over the city, everything from oyster beds that clean the water in the Hudson to wetlands that are actually in the river and help to modify the storm surge that takes place in the river. So this is a very exciting development, and it's something that largely came up through the good graces of people who we've been reaching out to over the last year and who understand what we're trying to do and want to try to help make it happen. One other thing I wanted to mention, and then I want to open this up for questions and discussion. But one other thing that I want to mention that has happened over the last year, and this was a result of Dan Paranak looking very carefully at some of the state DOT documents that came out. Their state DOT has done an evaluation of infrastructure around New York State, and they have identified the bridge over the Metro North tracks at West 254th Street, which we have always thought of as one of the access points to a future Hudson River Greenway. State DOT has identified that bridge as in poor repair. It's, they have different qualifications, good, poor, et cetera. It's categorized as poor. So at some point that bridge may be replaced. And as a result of the information that Dan found, we have reached out to our elected officials and urged them to keep in mind that any repair work that might be done on that bridge should not in any way preclude access to a future Hudson River Greenway. Whether or when that bridge will be repaired, we don't know. But we want to make sure that when it's done in such a way that we still have access to the river once we do get to the point, and by God, I'm convinced we will get to the point of actually building a Hudson River Greenway. So that's a lot of information about what's been going on. I'm sure there are questions before we get to the next part of the agenda. I want to open it up for questions and discussion and that sort of thing. I would just ask that everybody use the raise hand function, and I'll be glad to call on everyone as I see your hands. And I'll start with Laura.
Hi, everybody. I just also want to add to your excellent report, Bob, that we have reached out to our assemblymen and our congressmen for state and federal monies that came with the infrastructure monies, and asked them to kick in towards this engineering study. So we have been in touch with them on that, and we'll continue to follow up. I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely right. Thank you. I appreciate the reminder. Thanks, Laura. Sorry, if there were hands, they must have come down. I don't see any others at the moment.
I see Deb.
Oh,
Bob,
thank you. Oh, thanks. Yeah, Deb, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine. So the New York City Greenways coalition, on their map of like the city and all of its greenways, it seems to include the Hudson River Greenway and list it in the condition of unbuilt but planning underway. Do you have any background on that? Is that part of your efforts?
Yeah, we are part of that coalition now. I mean, I
Okay.
have reached out to them. I have communicated with them. And in fact, they have a conference coming up, which I'll speak a little more about in the next portion of the meeting. But yes, they're aware of us, we're aware of them. They know the status of the Greenway, which is exactly as you described it. So, yeah. Jody.
Thank you.
Yeah, Deb, a lot of those maps include anything that was ever discussed. So, you know, I have multiple versions since being on the state committee in '95. I was wondering, while we wait for funding, have you thought about talking to DEC about, we had talked about this either the last meeting or the one before, about the plan to put the sort of pier parallel to the shore and shadows on the water. That might be something to explore with them, whether they would say okay to that, because then you'll have a better sense of whether you have to stay onshore or if you can go offshore.
Yeah, we don't have direct communication with DEC at the moment, Jody, but I have had this conversation with a man by the name of Michael Morella, who is in the Department of City Planning, and he is the head of the, let me see if I can remember this correctly. He's the head of the waterfront planning. That's not the exact waterfront. The DCP has a waterfront revitalization plan.
Right.
He is in charge of that. He is in charge of anything that goes into the river. It goes into any water body in the city. And, you know, that has to be done through him. Exactly this issue came up in conversations with him, and we've had more than one. And yes, there would be shadows because of the portion of the Greenway that would have to be in the river. There is no way you can build in South Riverdale, you know, above Spuyten Duyvil without being in the river. There just isn't any land to build on. And he said this will be allowable, but there have to be offsets. There has to be something that we do in compensation for building in the river. He gave me an acronym of 3 R's, and I've forgotten all 3 R's, Jody. But the basic idea is that you know, you have to do something in return for what you're going to put into the river. You know, and he mentioned, for example, the Spuyten Duyvil Triangle is an area that's just sort of fallow, and
Yeah.
you know, something could be done there. But so
That's where I
the
was
short
leading.
answer is it can be done, even if there, you know, it is going to cast shadows in the river, which is unavoidable.
That's what I was leading to. So good
Right.
segue is Tony Hiss, the author.
Sure.
He and I had worked together in like '98, and they started to draw up a plan for something called Nature Rail, which was a rehabilitation of the triangle, not for public access, but for an environmental offset, and also to make it look less wild and unkempt with all the invasives. So as I dig through all my archives, if I come across that stuff, he actually had a architectural firm, Andrew Pogan, who did landscaping with native plants, involved in donating their time, like you just mentioned about Mott McDonald. So as it gets closer to the idea of funding, I'll have pulled together a lot of my past research on that I can
Sure.
share as needed. But Karen and the Harlem River Working Group and I are working on some ideas for living shorelines at Spuyten Duyvil. There is some land that is under DEP's jurisdiction because of the stormwater outfalls.
Mhm.
So that would tie into that mitigation of the shadows on the water, of offsetting it with something going on the land.
Yeah. Yeah, most of the outfalls actually fall outside our area. They're to the south of Spuyten Duyvil. But you know,
Giant one
certainly,
at Spuyten
and
Duyvil.
I know both from Karen and also from Chauncey Young at the Harlem River Working Group that's a big objective of theirs, which is to try to mitigate the amount of sewage that's going out from the CSOs south of Spuyten Duyvil.
Yeah, and I
But,
just
yeah.
talked with the public advocate's office about rain gardens and stormwater diversion in this
Right.
district. So,
Yeah, no, that's
so,
great. Thanks.
so when you get to Spuyten Duyvil, I'm ready.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jody.
You're
David Gelman.
Yes, thank you, Bob. You mentioned resiliency. You mentioned resiliency, and I don't want us to be sort of the tail wagging the dog. Except for the determination of MTA, we really don't need to build out on the river, and we really don't need to be spending all that kind of money for building out on the river, because that work is really resiliency effort that MTA will want to do for their own tracks. I mean, we really could build on the existing service road, but MTA doesn't want us to. And I think that part of this process is, I think it's great to encourage the resiliency. I think that we should go along for the ride whenever they come up with the money for the resiliency. But I don't think that we should be saying that we're doing all this work to build up a resilient shoreline for this Greenway. The Greenway will be able to go with whatever's there, and that effort to build up resiliency is a huge expenditure that is appropriate for MTA and their rails. I understand that, but it really is going to be built for them, and we should be working with them to ride on their coattails. But I don't think we should be saying, we need to build up the shoreline to do this Greenway.
Well, yeah, let me say, David, resiliency is a broad term, and it doesn't necessarily mean building up the shoreline. MTA is not particularly interested in building up the shoreline. What MTA has wanted to do, or more specifically, what Metro North has wanted to do, is to harden its infrastructure, and they have done that. They spent a considerable amount of money, which they got from the federal government, whether it was Sandy money or what it was, I don't recall. But I do recall that it was $20 million. And I've seen the work because I commute on Metro North. What they have done is they have taken all their power lines are now encased in some aluminum tubing, which, is resistant to the brackish water from the Hudson. All of their powers, all of their switches and power substations have been elevated. You can see them, they're all up on steps, however many feet, 6 feet, whatever it is, above grade. Metro North is prepared for a situation where the tracks are flooded and they're out of service until the tide recedes and the tracks dry up, which will be, 2 or 3 days. And that's the situation, that they're in. Fortifying the riverfront, which is a very costly endeavor, is not something that they see as a necessity at this point. And while, like you, David, I would love to see the Greenway built on the Metro North path that they use for their vehicles, they have been adamant from the beginning that they oppose that. And we are not going to win an argument against Metro North. We simply are not. And it's, it's futile to even attempt that. What the resiliency that I'm talking about, and it's the resiliency that, that the experts talk about, is things that will actually clean the Hudson. As strange as it sounds, at least it did to me when I first heard it, oyster beds and things like that, which used to be abundant in New York City, are now starting to come back, and they are actually a mechanism for cleaning the water. There are different kinds of vegetation plants and so on that are being planted along the shoreline, not just in the Hudson, but all over the city, that actually limit the amount of storm surge. They mitigate the storm surge. that's the kind of resiliency we're talking about here. It's not about building up the riverfront. It's about things that are going to make the Hudson both cleaner and a little more resistant to storm surges, which, as we all know, are going to happen more and more often in the future. So, so that's the component that I'm talking about.
Okay,
That is
that's
part of
very
the Greenway.
helpful. But does that still mean that we need $100 million worth of riprap boulders in the water?
No. The $100 million was never to put boulders there. I mean, you can do that for a fraction of that cost. The money that has been estimated for the cost of construction has to do with things like sinking piers in the river, building the Greenway on top of those piers, that sort of thing. And even when you come inland, that's the cost of the whole Greenway, or at least it was a few years ago.
Okay.
God knows what it will be by the time we get to that point. But it was not, that money was not all about, putting riprap along the shorefront.
Okay, thank you for the
All right.
information.
Sure, David. Robert Fass.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Bob. Two questions sort of may combine, and if you're going to address this later, that's fine. I'm just coming off of the initial call with the Leaf Island folks and Paul. I'm wondering what progress has been made in, Paul talked about making the DEP more of an ally, moving our focus off the DEC or the no agency and the DEP as the yes agency. I'm just curious sort of what developments have, what progress has been made in that regard.
Mhm.
And if Leaf Island is still involved in any way, and if so, if you could talk about what role they might play.
Yeah, Robert, first of all, thanks. You were instrumental in making that connection. And I forgot to mention that, but thank you very much. My memory is faulty.
Not to worry.
But thank you for that. So yeah, so Leaf Island got us to Mott McDonald, Michael Fishman, whom you know, Robert, and Paul Mankiewicz, and they are continuing to advise us on a voluntary pro bono basis, and they're the ones. Yes, DEC is going to be very important. And this was something I was going to get into in the next portion, but that's fine. It's coming up now, and this is a perfectly good time to get into it. Yes, as you said, DEP has a great interest in making sure that the Hudson is as clean as possible, because they're under an EPA mandate about cleaning up the New York City waterways. And that's why, for example, they've been so enthusiastic, DEP, about Tibbetts Brook and, that sort of thing, trying to keep clean water out of the sewer system. So they brought us to Mott McDonald, which is the engineering firm that's specialty is in green infrastructure, environmental friendly engineering, and so on. And we need DEC, which is the state component, just for people, there's a lot of initials floating around here. For people who aren't familiar with all of this, DEP is New York City, DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, is New York State. And we do need DEC. But what I learned, I was on another Zoom today with the Mott McDonald folks and Paul Mankiewicz and so on. We need the operating authority and we need DEC simultaneously. In other words, who is going to be responsible for maintaining and operating the Greenway once it's built? That is a question we actually have to answer sooner rather than later. Before we can proceed, we need to know which agency is going to do this. And apparently, as I learned today, there is a relationship between DEC and New York State DOT, Department of Transportation. And those agencies can work together on something like what we're talking about, a Greenway in the Hudson River. And we don't yet have the right contact at DEC. I was referred to somebody at DEP, the city, Department of Environmental Protection, who, as it turns out, has a long history in environmental activities. and he and I have exchanged information. He sounded enthusiastic and then he disappeared, which has been a problem on everything we've done on this project. I don't think there's, unlike what Jody and I were talking about earlier, where, down at just south of Spuyten Duyvil, we have the biggest CSO outfall in the city, which is a huge problem for DEP, New York City Department of Environmental Protection. There is nothing similar on the Hudson. There's only one outfall on the Hudson, and it's relatively small. So DEP does not see this as a significant project for them, and they don't have the enthusiasm for the Hudson that they have for the Harlem River, where they have a much bigger problem to address. But to put it in slightly different terms, I now understand the lay of the land with regard to these agencies, DEP, DEC, and the New York State DOT. And the whole question of who will operate this Greenway once it's built, which seemed to me to be a question way off in the future, since we're still trying to get engineering study money. In fact, it turns out that's a very critical question that actually has to be answered at the beginning of the whole process, which I now understand and did not understand before. So because of the Leaf Island connection that you mentioned, Robert, and the connection to Mott McDonald, I now have a much clearer picture of what the next steps are in the process. That's a very long answer to a very short question, but I hope I did answer your question. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Cliff.
Yeah, hi, Bob. I wanted to just provide a little bit of background into what we've been up to complement your efforts. These years are all starting to blend together, but I think since our last meeting, Friends submitted a grant application to Booth Ferris, which was turned down. I mention this not to, it shouldn't be a point of discouragement for us. It just, what I think it did is it gave us a little bit of insight into some of the challenges we're up against in trying to access some of this money. So there was no flaw, there was no problem. Our usage was in line with their mission. Problem is, Friends of the Hudson River Greenway is not really a functioning organization in that we don't have a staff, we cannot provide audited financial statements. So our inability to dot I's and cross T's, I think, put us in a position where some money that is meant for this purpose was not attainable. We also got a lead about a coastal resiliency fund. The problem there is that priority is given to projects that are 12 to 18 months away from being shovel ready, which we're not. So seems to me, from where we sit right now, our best bet is trying to access some of these federal funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while we have a lot of things going in our favor, meaning all of our elected officials are all on the same page and in favor of it. We've got a city council resolution now that's going on 4 or 5 years old in favor of it. It seems like it, and then we had the pandemic. It seems like we are having trouble maintaining momentum on this, right? And, the conversation with Andrea Stewart Cousins, while yes, it was encouraging because she's, into the project, what Bob alluded to at the beginning of this meeting was that, this catch-22 we're in, where you can't get funding for engineering studies in capital projects, right? So they and this is a problem we encountered again 4 or 5 years ago when Andy Cohen was more than ready to try to access capital funds from the city for the engineering report study, but ran into the same problem.
Mhm.
So these are more, I guess, observations than a roadmap from where we go from here. But I think we need to get, for lack of a better analogy, we need to get somebody on base here before we can drive them in. And I think kudos to Bob for these connections are how we are going to get the money we need, but we're just a little bit, we're not there yet, obviously.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Cliff, thanks so much for providing some of the background that that I just forgot to mention. There's no way this thing can be built without government money. I mean, what we tried to do with the foundations was to see if we could come up with enough money to cobble it together for the engineering study. But even with the foundations, even if you get the money, you get like $10,000, $25,000, maybe $50,000.
right.
We're looking for 3 million plus. So the foundations, with the foundations, more the imprimatur than it is the actual money. But at this point, we've got so many goddamn imprimaturs from elected officials that it's the last thing we need. And excuse my language, it's the last thing we need is somebody else saying, hey, this is a great idea. What we need at this money is called hard cash. What I've been discovering, or what I've been advised, really is a better way to put it, is that money is there in government agencies. The state DOT, for example, does have this kind of money, but in order to access it, you've got to present them with a plan that actually meets a need of theirs or a requirement of theirs. Because we have, as you said, Cliff, the support of every elected official that we've contacted in the Bronx, and thanks to Dr. Morrow and his group in Yonkers, in Southwest Yonkers as well, we have the electeds on board. What we really need to know at this point, and this is the next step, and we're sort of getting into the next part of the agenda, which is fine, is how do we speak the right language to New York State DOT and New York State DEC, which do work together and which do have projects that are both transportation friendly and environmentally beneficial. How do we speak the right language to them to free up the capital for them to do this sort of engineering study that we need to do as the next step? And we're getting closer now. I now understand what the target is, and I now understand what we have to do to reach that target. And while we haven't quite come up with the right formulation, I understand the objective now, and we're going to get there. We're going to have to lean hard on our elected officials, particularly at the state level, because we're talking about the state DOT and the state DEC. But we're going to have to lean hard on our state assembly member, state senator in both the Bronx and Yonkers. And that's the only way to open the door to these state agencies.
And get them to speak in unison, which,
exactly
hasn't exactly happened yet.
And essentially what we have to do is we have to come up with the language. We have to come up with the vocabulary that appeals to the state agencies, and then get our state representatives to endorse it and go to the state agencies. So I now understand another step in this process of moving us forward. Excuse me. I wish this were not so hard. But, and again, we're learning on the job, And, it's a long and complicated process, but we've got people who are very helpful and we're getting there step by step. I mean, it seems unbearably slow, but at the same time, we are actually moving forward.
And one other thing that we definitely mentioned last year, but didn't this year is so far as, talking about the Trust for Public Land, that we've got this MOU with them, which, when Bob and I, when this came to pass, I was excited about it because I felt that it gave us some credibility, that, we might not have had without it. But it has turned out to be a little bit of a disappointment thus far. They don't seem, it's not their highest priority, to put it mildly. Yeah. So and that's again where I feel like one small victory, I feel, could really start moving this ball in the right direction.
Yeah, Cliff, when I had the conversation today with the Leaf Island McDonald people, they said the Trust for Public Land is not insignificant. That this is a well-regarded, well-respected organization that has done a lot of projects, that are both recreational and environmental. They would not be the operating authority. They tend to do things like, build a playground and then they turn it over to the Parks Department, that sort of thing. But but having that connection will be useful as we get to the state agencies. The fact, and if for no other purpose, that then at some point money is going to have to go from a government agency to an entity, and TPL, Trust for Public Land, can be that entity, which was always how we envisioned them, as a fiscal conduit. So, we will get, that connection is important, and we will definitely make the best use of it as we move forward. So thanks, Cliff. Jody, I see your hand.
Yeah, a couple of questions. If my memory serves me, I believe DEC built the pocket park at the Riverdale train station. I can't remember her last name, Barbara Fratelli. I mean, I remember they came to the community board, they had plans, they were going to put an 80-foot pier out. And so I remember DEC being involved in the small part of the park. Is Parks maintaining that right now? The 3 sitting areas that are at the Riverdale station?
Yeah, they're maintaining it, Jody, to the extent that they collect the garbage there.
Right. So
Beyond that, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I'm thinking out loud, so sorry for the interruption, but I've just been listening, and Cliff, I think you said it perfectly about this is sort of lost momentum and isn't a priority to other people. It's like, ooh, a nice thing, but there's no urgency to it. So maybe the language that you've been using about resiliency, that has an urgency to it. It's not just the cleaning the river, but it's about when the storm surge comes, can we recover more quickly than we have? That pocket park got eroded out. I mean, like the concrete was hanging off, the shoreline was gone. Spite and Dival lost a couple of feet of shoreline during Sandy and Irene. So maybe tying it up into that kind of story. I think that's what we need, something that tells a story about how this 2-mile link connects not just Yonkers and Manhattan, but connects to all these other things that have more urgency, and maybe that will help move it to a higher priority. And then my second thing was,
well, let me stop you there. Let me address number 1 first, Jody.
okay.
That is exactly what I was getting at earlier, that what I have learned over the past year is that marrying the concept of transportation and recreation, which is how we have always seen the Greenway, with the notion of resiliency, it has become clear to me over the last year that is the way forward. That this has to be a project that has a resiliency element to it that is going to make the conditions along the riverfront better in some way. It will mitigate the storm surge. It won't prevent it, but it will slow it and make it not as bad as it is. You're absolutely right. I mean, I've been down to that pocket park, recently, and it is eroding. The base under the concrete is eroding, and it's only a matter of time before some portion of it just drops right into the river. So yes, so the resiliency, this project has to do two things. It has to be the missing link between Manhattan and Yonkers on the Greenway. It has to be the missing element of the Hudson River Greenway in the Bronx. And it also has to be a project that makes things better along the Hudson River shoreline, that improves conditions there, whether it's cleanliness, whether it's fortification of the river, not by means of riprap, but by means of mitigating storm surge, et cetera. It has to do both of those things. If it does that, that's the sweet spot for funding. It's something that appeals to DEC. It's something that appeals to DOT. And it's the right thing to do. I mean, it's the right thing for the community. So that's how we have to be moving forward.
Great. And then my second piece was, I think you mentioned it earlier about having to figure out who's actually going to build and operate this. My understanding is that whoever's actually going to build it would want their own engineering study. So shouldn't we try to figure that piece out? So when we do get the money for the engineering study, we already know like it's going to be accepted and not have to be redone because somebody else is going to be building it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is that how it works? That they'd want their own engineering study to build it?
Yeah, that's I don't know. I don't know that I would put it precisely that way, but basically that's right. As I've learned, as I said, naively, it's the first time I've ever tried to build a Greenway. Naively, I thought, well, the operating authority, that's, first you build a thing, then you find the operating authority. Turns out it's backwards. You have to have the operating authority right from the beginning. In Manhattan, that's the way it worked in Manhattan. And that's the way it has to work up here. So, before you can even build this thing, you need to know who is going to be responsible for the maintenance of it. And, from the advice I have been getting, to me, I always thought, well, it could be DOT, it could be the state parks. And the advice I have been getting is, no, it's really got to be state DOT. They, this is what they do. They do trails and roads and all this sort of thing, no matter where they are, in the water, on the land, they're going to have to be the partners in this. And we have to find who it is. Again, I learned, once this is done, I'm telling you, I'm going to know how to do this again, but I'm never going to want to do it again. But there actually is a partnership between DEC and DOT. There are people in those two agencies who work together. I don't know who they are, but that's the next step, is to find out who these people are. There is somebody within DOT whose mission is to do exactly the sort of thing we're trying to do, build environmentally friendly multi-use pathways, that sort of thing. Again, whether they're on land or in water, doesn't matter. And so, yes, so DOT in all likelihood is the number one candidate for the operating authority. And one of the next steps here is to find out who that person is in state DOT, and they have to be in from the beginning. The engineering study doesn't happen until they're on board, because frankly, they're the most likely candidates to provide the funding for it.
And then they
that's a very long
right?
yes to your question.
Yeah, it's okay. It's been a very long road, 95 till 2022. So
Don't remind me. Don't remind me.
Hey, I tell people you have to hang in there. Some things take a long time. But thank you, Bob.
Sure. Cliff, yeah, I saw your
Yeah,
hand.
Bob, just returning to Jody's first point, which you addressed early on also, that this idea that resiliency is the key to it. And you mentioned this also, that our existing feasibility study doesn't do a whole lot of talking about resiliency, right?
Mhm. Right.
And this is just occurring to me now. I don't kind of thinking out loud here, but we've got I don't think this thing, if somebody were to pick this up, out of the trash heap and make a decision as to whether this is funding ready. Do you feel like we're at a disadvantage because we don't have this thing dressed up for the prom? I guess what I'm saying is there something we can do in the absence of an engineering study that can make the feasibility study more attractive from a resiliency standpoint? Do we have to?
Yeah, well, I don't, we can't go backwards.
Right, understood.
We have the feasibility study we have. But yes, from the conversations I've had, the resiliency component can be added onto what we already have. We're at no disadvantage by not having it in hand right now.
Do you know that for sure? I mean, we don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've been told. I mean, I was on
Okay.
I was on a Zoom today with 3 people from Mott McDonald who do exactly this sort of thing, and and have done it and have said, okay, so you have to bring a resiliency element into this now. Nobody said, well, geez, you really should have done this. You dropped the ball. No, they all said, look, the fact that you already have a feasibility study that shows this thing can be done, everybody was very positive about the fact that we have gotten that far. And now, what we need to do is we need to add this component, as I say, first of all, because it's attractive to the government agencies, and secondly, because frankly, it's exactly what we should be doing. So, and in that respect, everybody's aligned and in agreement. We face a climate crisis. We all know it. We've all seen the effects of it, and we need to do something about it. And here's an opportunity where we can put the two together.
So we're at no disadvantage.
Correct.
Right now. Okay, good. Good to know.
Thanks. Dr. Morrow. I think you may be muted.
There we go. Had to find the right button in the right place, which I guess is what this meeting is about. I did want, these are good ideas. And I'm Bob Morrow, and for purposes of this meeting, the most important thing is I'm related to the BZAC Environmental Education Center and run the programs at the moment there. And also live in Low Park, which is right on the border of defined by the sewage treatment plant, where half of Westchester flushes into the Bronx and the Hudson. I've been flooded lately, speaking of that, with information from the New York State Department of Environmental, DEC. They're very interested in disadvantaged communities, and they're very interested in trailways, and they're very interested in the Erie Canal, and they're in building more trails and bird watching trails. And I think the aspect of environmental equity, which is what they're driving at, is a good way to look at this. We want to get the poor folk of Southwest Yonkers out of their cars and down to work on bikes and foot, get people out into the community in a positive way, build a park in Southwest Yonkers that connects into the Bronx and Manhattan. And they actually, in this process, I believe, are working out of the environmental equity laws of, I believe it was 2019. They've got about 20 state agencies working with them, and they've generated a map of health disparities related to related to environmental inequities. In my neighborhood, I looked up because they could do it by something that I couldn't get out of the Department of Health. They did it out of all of the census tracts in the state. My census tract is the proud owner of being in the 97th percentile. Unfortunately, 0 is the best and 100 is sudden death. So we're quite close to sudden death due to the pollution of that area, which can be cleaned up. And there's another project, not for tonight's meeting. But the idea of working to get this community out of buses, out of cars, on their feet, on their bikes, is very appealing to the DEC at the moment. I conversed with them a bit, and they said they'd be more than happy to come down and make a presentation at the to the community about this, get our neighborhood associations together to discuss this. And I think it's a very important angle. When you talk about resiliency, really also talking about extraordinary health disparities, extraordinary problems with life expectancy, infant mortality, asthma, cancer, and so on, all of which they've now quantified by census tract. And anybody who would like that, you can go to them. I've got it. You can find these numbers which we've been searching for a number of years. And it ain't pretty. So they are interested in prettifying areas with trails, with ways of making more environmental equity. And I think an angle is a very, very valuable new angle for us to look for funding. And their pockets are overflowing at the moment. So that's what I wanted to start that part of that discussion.
Bob, thank you for providing that context, because that's important. I think we know that Southwest Yonkers on the whole is not a prosperous area. And, as you point out there, in terms of health equity, it ranks poorly. That's, I think, a good argument that we should be using with the elected officials in Yonkers, and in Westchester County, who represent that area. Getting people to the waterfront is beneficial, period. It's beneficial in terms of mental health, physical health, and so on. So that is, that is an important component of what we're trying to do. And I'm really glad that you mentioned it and reminded us of it. So thanks for that. Cliff, is your hand up from before? Is your hand up from before?
That was all, yeah.
Okay, all right, good, thanks. All right, so let me move on. Oh, I'm sorry, Robert.
Just a quick question on the heels of that. How different are the numbers for Riverdale and Spuyten Duyvil from Southwest Yonkers? Do we have that info?
I don't know. I would guess that if we're talking specifically about Riverdale and Spuyten Duyvil, they're a hell of a lot better than they are for Southwest Yonkers. If we look at the whole community board area, which includes Kingsbridge Heights, public housing at Marble Hill and Fort Independence, then it starts to resemble Southwest Yonkers more. I've actually I'm also on the Racial Equity Committee, and we've looked at some of the census tracts and some of the disparities within Community Board 8, and they are considerable between some of the poorer parts of Community Board 8 and some of the wealthier parts. But Dr. Morrow is quite right to remind us that the whole issue of health equity is and should be a part of this discussion. So
yeah, that data is easily available now.
Yes, it is. I know. Thank you. So let me move on to the next portion. Again, this is a somewhat fungible line here between what's happened over the last year and what the steps forward are. We've gotten into a little bit of this, but I just want to mention a couple of things that I think are frankly quite encouraging. first of all, in the short term, there is going to be a New York City Greenways conference on Thursday and Friday of this week. And this is something because I was away on vacation and, not on top of email during that time, I'd hoped to sign up to do it in person. It's taking place in Lower Manhattan. It in person filled up very quickly, but it is also available virtually. Anybody can sign up and join this conference virtually. And I did get to Cliff just before I came back from vacation. And I think, Cliff, you're doing Thursday and I'm going to do Friday, right? Okay. So this is a remember, before I mentioned the New York City Greenways as a, big environmental or Greenway umbrella, which includes a lot of smaller groups and specific groups such as ours throughout the city. And they're having a Greenways conference on Thursday and Friday. They're going to have Mayor Adams there in person. They say that Senator Schumer will be there in person. We'll have to see what happens over the next couple of days. There's always breaking news in Washington, but it's going to be a very important conference in terms of networking, connecting with groups that are active and greenways throughout the city and that sort of thing. So between Cliff and myself, we're going to devote as much time as we can to it. If there's anybody on this Zoom who wants to join it, just send me an email or send the community board office an email, and I'll send the link to you and you can sign up to do it virtually. I mean, virtually it's unlimited, the number of people who can sign on to it. They're both not quite all day, but they're, morning until mid-afternoon conferences, both days. There are a lot of different speakers and that sort of thing. So, for anybody who's seriously interested in this sort of thing that we're talking about, it might be something that you'll want to join. But, I expect, I'm very hopeful that, something will come out of this that will be very helpful to us in moving forward with the Greenway. So that's one item. Cliff, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it's www.greenways.nyc. Greenway,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
there's the website. The second thing I wanted to mention, and this is not insignificant, this is a really good piece of news. The legislature has passed the Environmental Bond Act, and this is going to be on the ballot in November. There is going to be a proposal on the ballot to fund the Environmental Bond Act. It is proposed for $4.2 billion. And what this bond act would do, bear with me a second while I get the information here. It's $4.2 billion. The funding would include $1.5 billion for climate mitigation, $1.1 billion for restoration and flood risk reduction, which is what we were talking about earlier, resiliency, $650 million for open space conservation and recreation, and $650 million for water quality projects. I mean, we fall under like 3 of the 4 categories there with the Greenway. And I was in communication with Assemblyman Dinowitz in his office about this to get more information. This money will be administered by the DEC, the state DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. Again, this is assuming that the Bond Act is approved by the voters on the ballot in November. I mean, that's the key here. And frankly, every one of us ought to be encouraging everybody we know to vote for this thing in November, because it's something that's going to be very beneficial in many ways, not just in terms of, the Hudson River Greenway, but in terms of the environment for New York State, New York City. But it's going to be on the ballot. It's going to be administered by DEC, and as I understand it, or as, at least as it was relayed to me through the Assemblyman's office, projects will be proposed to the DEC, and the DEC will decide which projects are worthy of funding. And as I say, we meet several different criteria in this proposed bond act. Excuse me. I think, if this thing is proposed, I think we've got a real shot at getting some significant funding out of this bond act. So I wanted to pass that information along. I have not seen it, the information widely disseminated at this point. And as I say, it will be on the ballot in November, and we really should all be reaching out to people to encourage them to vote for the bond proposal on the ballot. So that is, as I see it, a piece of very good news. The only other thing I wanted to add, and again, I encourage questions and discussion. The one person I realize, we have been in touch with all of our elected officials. I think we need to be in better communication with Senator Schumer, who is the key to funding. I mean, he is in a very powerful position, at least until the end of this year, at which point he's going to be, I'm afraid, in a much less powerful position. And we have had some communication with an aide of his over the past year or more, and I think we really need to ramp that back up again. As I say, he's scheduled to speak at this Greenways conference on Friday. But I know the community board has the information about his local contact, and I think we really need to be in further communication, more direct communication, and be a little more forceful in communicating with his office. But I realize now, 4 full months into her term, that we have not had communication with the Bronx Borough President, Vanessa Gibson, about the Greenway. And that's an oversight on my part. Not that she has access to funds, but that as we're lining up all the elected officials who support this project, and we are going to need their support moving forward, particularly, if we're talking at the state level, having the Bronx Borough President on board with this project, I think, is going to be important. So I want to reach out to her office over the coming weeks and, see if we can find a time to give her a briefing on this project and, make sure that we have her support as well as the support of the other elected officials that we do have. So those are some of the steps forward. Although, as I say, we've already covered some of this in our earlier conversations, our earlier discussion. But again, are there any questions, any comments, anything further that anybody wants to offer? Robert?
Yeah, this sounds very encouraging. I just wanted to ask, it just crossed my mind to wonder whether the funds out of the Environmental Bond Act, can we be confident that we won't have the same kind of catch-22 hamstringing of those funds because we're looking for the engineering study money rather than the construction money? Is there a similar dynamic at work there? Or do we know?
I don't know the answer to that question because the Assemblyman's office doesn't know the answer to the question, not at this point. And I will follow up on that. I mean, that's a very good question, and we'll follow up. I think the answer is going to be, we don't yet know. But, my hope is by the time we get to November and whenever the funding becomes available, which in all likelihood, let's assume it's passed by the voters in November, the money probably becomes available next year, in 2023. My hope is that at that point, we will have already made the connection to the state DOT and DEC, and we will have a lot more information. And if there is an obstacle to funding, because it's a study rather than a construction project, we will at least know that and know what we have to do to, to overcome that obstacle. So that's my hope. But yes, but it's the right question to ask and the right issue to raise, Robert. Thank you.
Bob, there may
Yeah.
be some representatives of elected officials on this call, and they may want to introduce themselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, Laura. And yes, I see Alina Dow from the Mayor's Community Affairs Office. Alina, it's nice to see you. Do you want to say a few words?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Yes, my name is Alina Dow. I am the newly appointed Bronx Borough Director with the Mayor's Community Affairs. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say hi to everyone. What I've been trying to do is I haven't been able to get to your general meeting as of yet, but I believe in just meeting people personally anyway. So I've been trying to go to different committees and just say hi. I want everyone to know that I'm listening to what's happening. I'm not familiar with the Hudson Greenway, so that's why I wanted to make sure that I came in and sort of got an idea of what was going on and thinking about any way that I would be able to provide any assistance to you guys. Anything going on in the community, please. I know you guys don't have a chat, so I cannot share my information, but I am meeting with, and I have spoken with your district manager, Sierra, so I will ask her to share my information. And I do plan to join your general board meeting, which I think the chat will be open. But nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too.
Very nice to meet you. And yeah, we will definitely stay in touch with you. And, if you're in communication with Kira Gannon, the district manager, then, we know we'll stay in touch with you through her. So, so thanks very much for coming to the meeting.
No, thank you.
And I'm not sure, I see we have somebody here who's representing one of the candidates for Senate. I don't see a full name, but I see Sam, and Sam, if you want to say something, you'd be welcome to. That's up to you.
Sure. Hi. I think that most of you have seen my name before. It used to say Dinowitz. Now it's for Miguelina Camillo. She's running for state senate. Obviously, this is something that's of key interest to us. Environmental issues are important to Miguelina, and we wanted to make sure that if elected, we're up to speed with the up to speed with CPH. That way, we wouldn't have to worry about getting on the same page, and that we'd already be ready to do exactly what you were saying, Bob. Take the language of conservation, of making sure that we have resiliency for our shorefronts, and then make sure that we can help you push for the funding through whatever means you're trying to ask for it. So hopefully you'll be seeing me again, and hopefully you'll be seeing me again in a little over a year.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining the meeting tonight.
Thank you for having it. It's good work that you guys are doing.
Thank you. All right, so before we sign off, is there anything else? Any questions, Greenway related questions anybody wants to ask? Anything to bring up? Jody?
Oh,
Okay, I don't want to say this, but I will. Have you talked to NIMTech? I mean, can't they connect you, since they have all those organizations are on it? Can't they connect you to the state DOT person? That would be, you could call Jerry Bogaz. I think I still have his number if he's there.
No, I still have his email too. Again, if he's still there. No, we haven't been in touch with him recently, but no, I'm glad you reminded me about Jerry Bogas and NIMTIC, Jody. He would certainly be a connection, I would think. Ought to be.
Yeah, he might be able, if he's still there. I know a lot of people have left, but or even NIMTech themselves might be able to just point you in the direction of who
Right.
at state DOT would be the one responsible for this.
Exactly right. No, that's a very good point. Thank you so much, Jody.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? All right, well, thank you everyone for coming to the meeting tonight. I said at the beginning, there was bad news and good news, and I think that's still the case, but I'm optimistic. I believe we're going to get there. As I've said many, many times, if it were easy, it would have been built by now. So, we're just going to have to keep at it. But I do believe we're making progress. And, I always want to remember that, we got over the single most important hurdle, which is that a feasibility study was done. And it said, yes, this thing can be built in a way that will not interfere with Metro North, that they can live with. And had we not gotten past that point, we'd be dead in the water. But we did get past that point, and we just have to keep pushing on. But we learned a lot over the past year about outreach and other organizations, and made a lot of key contacts. And I think now it's going to be a matter of really doing follow-up over the coming months, and we'll do it. So for those of you who are able to join the Greenways Coalition Conference on Thursday or Friday or both days, perhaps I'll see you there. And otherwise, thanks everybody for coming to the meeting, and everybody have a good evening.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Yes. Thank you, Laura.
Second.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.